Hey guys, tonight we're heading back to ancient Egypt, where the sun blazes like a divine hairdryer, the Nile glimmers under an endless sky, and perfume sits on your head in the shape of a small, waxy cone. That's right. You're about to navigate the sweltering streets of Thebes with what's basically a scented candle slowly melting down your forehead. You'll duck beneath palm-thatched roofs, fan yourself with woven reeds, and maybe just maybe catch a whiff of sacred lotus before the heat turns your linen tunic into a sweat sponge. People are passing you in linen skirts. Barefoot children dodge donkeys, and somewhere, someone is offering to sell you a cooling melon that is definitely warm. The air smells like sand, sweet oils, and ambition. And yes, you probably wouldn't survive this climate for more than a week, but tonight, you'll be just fine. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Oh, and drop a comment with your location and local time. It's always amazing to see who else is drifting off with us. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing on a dusty street in Thebes around 1350 BCE. It's early morning, and the sun is already threatening to climb into the unforgiving part of the sky. Around you, vendors are setting up little stalls, hawking flatbread, clay jars, and baskets of figs that buzz with flies despite being doused with herbs. You squint upward, but there's no relief, no shade, just a giant wall of sky and heat. Then you spot her. Gliding toward you is a noble woman, tall, serene, wrapped in flowing white linen and trailed by two attendants. She's wearing the standard elite look: makeup, earrings, elaborate wig. But what really catches your eye is the little cone of something resting squarely on the crown of her head. It's pale, a bit waxy, shaped like a miniature Hershey's Kiss. And it's definitely not just decorative. As she walks past, a faint trail of scent follows something floral, maybe lotus or blue lily. With a touch of resin, it's oddly soothing, like catching the ghost of a candle that burned hours ago. You're now in ancient Egypt, where the sun rules the sky, and humanity responds by turning into walking incense sticks. The ancient Egyptians had a love-hate relationship with the heat. On one hand, it brought fertile floods, dictated the rhythm of agriculture, and ensured everyone got nice tans. On the other hand, it made life, frankly, exhausting. So, how did people stay cool in a world where shade was a privilege and bathing was optional? Well, one way was through scent. Not just any scent, oh no. We're talking meticulously prepared perfumes, infused into wax cones designed to slowly melt throughout the day. Think of it as the ancient version of a Glade plug-in, only more personal and perched awkwardly on your scalp. It wasn't just fashion or hygiene. Scent had spiritual and social weight. Temples were infused with myrrh, sacred animals anointed with oils, and gods serenaded with incense smoke. To wear a perfume cone was to signal wealth, leisure, and perhaps divine favor, or at least a really good connection at the perfumery. Historians believe these cones were made primarily from a mix of animal fat or beeswax, infused with floral and resin-based oils. They were hardened into a neat shape and placed directly on the head, often over a wig, which conveniently doubled as a drip catcher. As the day wore on and the heat increased, the cone would begin to melt, releasing fragrance that mingled with sweat, dust, and the faint panic of mid-afternoon heat stroke. The practice appears extensively in tomb art. Women are depicted at banquets, sitting under fruit-laden trees, with perfectly symmetrical cones neatly balanced on their heads. Men too, occasionally wore them, especially during formal occasions. Children, not so much, probably because no one wants a 4-year-old running around flinging hot wax. Of course, historians still argue whether these cones were actually worn daily or whether they were more symbolic. Artistic shorthand for this person smells good and is probably important. After all, we haven't found preserved cones in tombs, but there are traces of perfumed waxes on burial wigs. And really, the only thing we know for sure is that ancient Egyptian society deeply, deeply loved smell. Let's not forget that in ancient texts, scent is connected to the divine. Gods are said to delight in offerings of incense. A good pharaoh is described as the lotus blossom that makes the land fragrant. And if your breath stinks, well, there are recipes for that too, typically involving mint and ground frankincense. Brushing your teeth, by the way, was an enthusiastic, if gritty, affair usually done with a twig dipped in crushed minerals. You drift down an alley now, past a perfumery. Inside, apprentices crush petals, shave resin, and stir fat over low flames. The smell is overpowering, a heady mix of sweet, sour, and spicy. One jar promises the calming embrace of Hathor. Another boasts of blue lotus dew, preserved in sacred beeswax. You're not entirely sure what that means, but you'd buy it, probably in bulk. The cone's melting wasn't just a sensory pleasure, it had strategic benefits. In a world where hygiene was more ritualistic than scientific, anything that distracted from body odor was welcome, especially when you were attending a royal feast and sitting shoulder to shoulder with 30 other sweaty guests. By the way, deodorant? Not exactly a thing. Most people relied on perfumed oils and hope, maybe a little natron powder if you were fancy. So having a fragrant cone slowly melt over your hair, face, and shoulders wasn't just indulgent. It was practical and maybe a little dramatic. As you move back into the bustling main street, you notice more heads bobbing with cones. Some large, some modest, a few already dripping in the morning heat. You pass a group of harpists tuning their instruments under a makeshift canopy. One of them, clearly high-ranking, is adjusting her wig and trying not to let her cone slide off. She catches your eye, shrugs with a smirk, and mutters something like, "It's going to be a 3-melt day." You don't know what that means, but it feels correct. The sun is fully up now, and your own forehead is damp. Maybe not from scented wax, but the empathy is real. Ancient Egypt wasn't just pyramids and tombs. It was heat, ritual, adaptation, and a surprisingly elegant response to a very human problem: how to feel beautiful when everything smells like donkeys and dust. You press forward, deeper into the day, trailing the scent of long melted flowers. You stop in your tracks, curiosity pulling you toward the memory of that little waxy peak balanced on the noble woman's head. What was that thing exactly? It wasn't just fashion. It couldn't be. It sat so deliberately, so proudly up there, a tiny triangle of intrigue. Turns out, what you saw was a perfumed cone, a small marvel of Egyptian olfactory engineering. And tonight, you're going to get very familiar with its drippy little ways. Imagine a palm-sized dollop of wax, often tinted ivory or pale yellow, shaped into a conical or dome-like mound. The outer layer is smooth, maybe with a slight floral pattern pressed into the base. If the artisan had a little flair, it's firm in the cool morning air, but by midday, it becomes a slow-moving syrup of scent. You reach up and feel your own cone. Now, hypothetically speaking, it's cool to the touch, but you know, its hours are numbered. By noon, it'll begin to surrender to the heat, and as it melts, it will release wave after wave of sweet perfume. blue lotus, sacred myrrh, perhaps a dash of cinnamon bark if your supplier was feeling generous. Historians believe the primary ingredient was animal fat, or beeswax, selected for its melting point and availability. Beeswax was preferred by the upper classes. It smelled better, lasted longer, and didn't come with the awkward ethical dilemma of rubbing sheep goo into your scalp. The fat was infused with aromatic oils. Blue lotus was especially prized, a flower linked with rebirth, the gods, and an odd tendency to open at dawn and close by dusk. Other common additions included frankincense, cardamom, sweet flag, an aquatic plant that sounds cooler than it smelled, and occasionally, as one translated, papyrus delicately suggests, essence of bird. We're not entirely sure what that means. Was it musk from certain birds? Dried pigeon powder? No one knows. But it probably didn't smell like Dove body wash. Now, here's the thing. No actual perfumed cone has been recovered intact. Not a single one. We have paintings, hundreds of them, showing elegant figures at banquets, parties, and rituals with these cones clearly perched atop their heads. And many of those paintings show the cones melting, mid-drip. That seems oddly specific for an artistic metaphor. So the question remains, were these real, physical objects people wore on their heads? Or were they symbolic, like little visual shorthand for this person was fragrant and socially delightful? Historians still argue whether the cones existed in daily life or whether they were more ceremonial. Some believe they were used only during specific rituals or feasts. Others suspect they may have been applied just before death, placed on the wig or head of the deceased during burial ceremonies to ensure their afterlife would smell divine. But here's the thing. Chemical analysis of wigs found in tombs has revealed traces of aromatic compounds, resins, and oils consistent with perfume. That doesn't prove the cone's shape, of course, but it does suggest that perfuming the hair was more than just an artistic flourish. For your purposes tonight, though, you're wearing one. It's firmly in place, your wig giving it just the right amount of squish, and the sun promising to turn it into a sleepy little waterfall of fragrance by lunch. As you walk, you imagine the experience. The first few hours, the cone's subtle, a faint, cooling presence. By midday, it's trickling slowly into your wig, coating the strands with shine and scent. By late afternoon, your temples are slick, your shoulders smell like a temple offering, and your cone is half its former size. Now, picture this happening during a formal banquet. You arrive just after sunset, the air still heavy with heat, but slightly more forgiving. You're shown to your seat beneath a painted canopy, palm fronds rustling faintly above. Musicians pluck stringed instruments, and someone hands you a cup of date wine, chilled in a clay jar that's been dunked in Nile water all afternoon. Everyone is wearing cones. The scent is dizzying lotus, acacia, cinnamon, a hint of something sharp and citrusy you can't quite place. It mingles with the roasted goose, the honey-glazed figs, and the whiff of sandalwood smoke curling from a tiny brazier in the corner. Cones were especially popular at events like these. They didn't just freshen the air, they helped guests stand out. A perfumed cone said, "I can afford this luxury. I know how to entertain. Please notice my very fragrant scalp." Egyptian society was deeply hierarchical. Everything from your clothing to your sandals, or lack thereof, said something about your place in the social order. Perfume was no different. The richer the scent, and the more complex its ingredients, the more impressive your status. But even the rich had to be careful. A cone too large could slip off and plop into your barley stew, too melty, and it would leave waxy streaks down your wig and shoulders. which your servant would need to remove delicately with linen cloths and polite coughing. Still, the cone served a dual function, smelling great and feeling cooler. That sounds odd, but there's some logic to it. As the cone melted, the wax spread thinly over the scalp and upper body. In theory, the evaporating oils could have a slight cooling effect, especially if fanned, not quite air conditioning. But in a pre-electricity world, you took what you could get. And don't forget, many wigs were stuffed with padding or braided reeds for volume. These could act like insulation, keeping the sun off your actual scalp. Combined with a perfumed cone, it was like having a tiny, aromatic swamp cooler balanced on your head. A gooey, fragrant swamp cooler. You pass a young woman now, leaning out of a second-story window. She adjusts the cone on her head with 2 fingers, then fans herself lazily with a papyrus leaflet. Down the street, a child chases a dog into a pile of date pits. Someone nearby sneezes loudly. You catch a waft of cumin and citrus, and you realize it's from a passing merchant whose cone is practically dripping over one eye. Maybe cones weren't always graceful. Maybe they slid, smeared, dripped. Maybe people laughed, wiped, repositioned, maybe sent. Like most things in history, was less about elegance and more about effort. Still, when the sun beats down and the Nile glints like a sheet of polished copper, and all you want is something, anything, to make you feel less like a roasted beetle. A cone is comfort, a tiny act of defiance. You will not be undone by heat. You will smell like a lotus. Dang it. And with that thought, you wander into the golden haze of late morning, a little waxier than before. I'll wipe your brow well, your wig, technically, and make your way through a shaded corridor of sycamore trees toward the sound of music. There's a banquet starting, and your host has spared no expense. You're not just here to feast. You're here to be fragrant, admired, and possibly sweat through your 3rd layer of linen without anyone noticing. You step into a broad, open-air courtyard lit by the low, slanted gold of late afternoon. Palms sway in the breeze, and the scent of roasted duck mingles with date wine and fresh honey cakes. Low tables are scattered under canopies, and the cushions look just soft enough to collapse onto without much dignity. You spot others already lounging: noblemen, scribes, maybe a minor priest or 2, each with a perfect little cone perched on their wigs, glistening slightly in the heat. This is where the perfumed cone reaches its theatrical peak, the formal Egyptian banquet. Banquets weren't just dinner. They were rituals in status, scent, and slow melting. They were how society saw and smelled itself. You'd be greeted with chilled water or sweet beer, often poured over your hands before you even sat down. Attendants would help you to your cushion, adjust your cone if it had wobbled during travel, and offer you perfumed cloths to dab at your already damp temples. And yes, everyone noticed everyone else's cone. The noble across from you raises an eyebrow as a drop of wax drips too early from your cone and lands on your shoulder. His cone hasn't budged. It's either expertly crafted or cursed with unnaturally firm beeswax. Either way, you're mildly jealous. His scent hits your nose a second later. Blue lotus with a faint edge of cinnamon. A bold combination. Historians tell us that banquets were frequent in elite Egyptian life, especially in the New Kingdom era. Feasts marked everything from royal birthdays to minor river festivals to just because the granaries are full parties. And because these gatherings often lasted hours, sometimes all day, and into the night, keeping guests cool and pleasant smelling was a logistical challenge. Enter the cone. But it wasn't just guests wearing them. Dancers, musicians, servers, many are depicted in tomb art, also sporting smaller, perhaps more modest cones. Was that artistic symbolism, or did even working class entertainers get the scented treatment? Historians still argue whether this suggests universal usage at banquets, or if the artist simply didn't want anyone left out of the waxy fashion. You lean back, savoring a fresh fig, and look around. A musician plucks gently at a lute-like instrument. Her cone has already begun to soften, a faint sheen catching the fading light. She sings softly, her voice blending with the warm breeze. Your own cone is starting to surrender, now slow drips sliding down your wig, mingling with sweat, perfume, and a little roasted garlic from the appetizers. Honestly, it's kind of soothing, like a massage for your senses, or a very lazy essential oil diffuser perched on your scalpy. You sip cool wine from a wide ceramic cup and observe the other guests. The woman beside you, noble by the looks of her lapis jewelry, leans close to whisper something, and you catch a whiff of frankincense. Her cone must be made from a darker wax, thicker, slower to melt. Maybe she added something to slow the drip. Maybe it's her secret weapon. Smell nice, talk little, and don't let your cone fall into the stew, she says, with a sleepy smile. Sage advice. Servants appear with platters of grilled fish wrapped in palm leaves. Someone fans your shoulder gently, whether to cool you or to keep your cone's perfume circulating. You're not sure. Either way, it's working. The scent wafts upward with each motion, a soft mix of florals and subtle spice. You let yourself melt alongside the wax. The heat is still present. It always is, but it's become part of the rhythm now. The cone helps, so does the company, the wine, the music. It's like you've all agreed to gently ignore the fact that your wigs are slowly turning into hot oil traps. Still, fashion has its limits. Across the way, a younger guest, a bit too confident for his age, leans over to laugh at a joke, and his cone teeters, tilts, and plops straight into a bowl of lentils. A few guests pause. Someone snorts. The coneless young man freezes, sheepish. One of the attendants rushes over with a cloth and a replacement cone from a chilled tray. Yes, they had extras, and everyone politely resumes pretending they didn't see it happen. Banquets, like any performance, had their mishaps. But the cones weren't only about masking sweat or projecting status. They were also about creating a shared atmosphere. Imagine 20, 30, even 40 cones slowly releasing scent into a single open space. The effect would have been hypnotic, layered, a drifting haze of sweetness and earth, flour and resin, punctuated by the smoky tang of grilled meats and the faint salt of the Nile. You imagine being a guest at such a gathering, your senses flooded, your body cooled ever so slightly by evaporating oils, your social cues measured not just by what you say, but by how gracefully your cone melts. Too fast, poor wax. Too slow, cheap ingredients. Just right. You're the scent of the evening. You recline further, half listening to the music, your limbs loosening as the sky shifts into that purpley haze of pre-night. The cones have done their job. Everyone looks calm, shiny, maybe a little drowsy. The heat no longer matters. The sweat is just another layer of oil. You're practically a walking incense stick, and that's not a complaint. As the banquet winds down, servants begin handing out chilled cloths and light rosewater spritzes. Some guests are dabbing their foreheads, others scraping the remaining wax from their wigs before the walk home. One older man has clearly given up and is just letting his cone finish the job in peace. You rise, slightly sticky, but pleasantly dazed. Your cone is mostly gone now, but its scent lingers on your skin, in your wig, in the very air that surrounds you. It's been hours. You've feasted, laughed, watched a minor fashion tragedy unfold, and left a waxy imprint on a very expensive cushion. And yet, despite all that, you smell fantastic. The next morning, you wake up with the faintest perfume still clinging to your wig, now resting awkwardly beside your bed mat, along with yesterday's linens. One sandal, and what appears to be the cone's final waxy, remains stuck to a bead on your necklace. The air is already heating up, and you know what that means. Time for cone number 2. You reach for your morning grooming kit, a modest box of alabaster and wood, nestled with jars of unguents, cones wrapped in waxed cloth, and a carved ivory applicator that looks suspiciously like a tiny spoon. Today's cone is slightly smaller than last night's banquet version. It's designed more for practicality, subtle scent, moderate drip rate, and minimal eyebrow interference. As you get ready, you reflect on a truth that defined ancient Egyptian daily life. Rich people simply smelled better, or at least they had the means to smell intentionally. Fragrance in Egypt was deeply class-coded. The elite bathed in perfumed water, anointed themselves with rare imported oils, and had servants whose sole task was to keep them cool and aromatic. The poor, well, they had natron, stale beer, and luck. But here's the surprise. Aromatics weren't reserved just for nobles. Even the working class engaged with scent, albeit in simpler ways. Market vendors might rub crushed herbs into their armpits before a long day shouting over fish. Brewers might dab diluted myrrh around the collarbone to cut the stench of fermenting barley. Scribes reportedly chewed mint leaves not just for freshness, but to avoid offending their superiors with temple breath. In a climate like this, scent wasn't a luxury. It was a survival tactic. That said, the type of perfume mattered. Myrrh, frankincense, and lotus were elite tier smells. Lesser oils like castor or sycamore fig were more common and sometimes less appreciated. One surviving text records a complaint that a certain merchant reeked of goat oil and lies. That's the ancient Egyptian equivalent of a 1-star Yelp review. So yes, you can tell a person's rank by how many bees died for their cone. This morning, you pass a group of laborers unloading amphorae from a barge. It's barely dawn, and already their linen tunics are sticking to their backs. One of them waves off a fly with a sprig of mint. Another dabs a cloth soaked in vinegar behind his ears. You're not entirely sure it helps, but hey, it's effort. You nod at them in greeting, and one gives you a lopsided grin before muttering something that sounds like "smellin' rich." Neighbor, whether it's admiration or sarcasm is unclear. Later, you wander through a narrow side street where the scents change with every few steps. Dried fish, date syrup, fermenting figs, goat dung, someone's breakfast stew, then suddenly a burst of sweetness from an open window where a perfumer's apprentice is stirring hot wax over a low flame. You pause. That, you think, is your next cone. In some households, scent was managed by designated staff. Wealthy homes employed oil bearers, servants trained to mix, store, and apply perfumes throughout the day. These weren't just walking deodorant sticks. They had recipes, rituals, and some serious olfactory instincts. For instance, applying too much oil in the morning might overwhelm the cone later in the day. But a light layer, that encouraged a more balanced melt. You had to think in layers: top note, base note, drip rate. Your hair needed to hold scent without becoming a wax pond. Your wig must breathe, even if it was made of goat hair, and panic. And then there were the personalized cones, tailored blends for individuals, like scent-based calling cards. Oh, that's Neferhotep. I'd know his sandalwood ginger cone anywhere. Speaking of wigs, they were essential to cone function. You try pressing a cone directly to your scalp, prepare for a waxy sunburn, and the ridicule of at least 3 temple guards. Wigs provided insulation, style, and something for the cone to stick to. They came in all shapes and levels of fabulous, from simple braids to giant architectural puff towers that looked like they should have scaffolding. You step into a small shop, tucked between a jeweler and a bakery. Inside, wigs hang from pegs like very hairy hats. A woman behind the counter is brushing out a tangled one that looks like it survived both a sandstorm and an angry cat. New cone? She asks without looking up. You nod. She gestures to a box by the door, a neatly arranged selection of pre-scented cones labeled with hieroglyphic symbols. Lotus, myrrh, cedar, cinnamon, neroli. You pick one that smells like dusk on the riverbank, subtle, floral, with just enough resin to hint at importance. Wig oils extra? She says, still brushing, but worth it if you don't want your cone sliding into your eyebrow again. You leave with your cone secured in a palm leaf pouch and your wig feeling marginally less like a hay bale. The rich may have had access to better scents, but even those lower on the ladder found ways to incorporate aroma into daily life, from palm leaf sachets to scented jewelry. Egyptians found clever ways to fight the ever-present sweat. Fragrance was social capital, spiritual currency, and personal statement, all melted into one gooey, floral cone. You glance up at the sun. It's climbing. The breeze stirs, warm and lazy. Your cone will start to soften soon. You press forward, leaving a faint trail of blue lotus and confidence behind you. And if someone calls you fancy head as you pass, well, maybe you are. By mid-morning, your scalp is beginning to feel it. That faint tug of heat, the subtle itch behind your ear, and the unmistakable sensation of wax molecules coming to life. The perfumed cone has started its slow descent, and your wig, bless its woven, scratchy heart, is bravely absorbing the drip. You're not alone in this struggle. Just ahead, a scribe walks at a dignified pace, cone already glistening. A thin sheen of wax glues a few strands of his wig to his forehead, but he doesn't seem to mind. That's the thing about ancient Egyptian fashion. It wasn't about comfort. It was about being seen, scented, and taken seriously. Still, let's talk honestly. Your wig, it's a sauna. You duck into the shade of a mud brick wall and lift a corner of your headpiece to let a puff of air in. The relief is instant and temporary. You fan yourself with your hand, grateful you didn't opt for the double-thick ceremonial style this morning. That one turns your head into a baked barley loaf before breakfast. Egyptian wigs weren't just stylish. They were functional, made of human hair, wool, palm fibers, or a combination. They offered protection from the sun, cover from lice, and perhaps most importantly, the perfect platform for a melting perfume cone. It's essentially wearable aromatherapy infrastructure. If you were wealthy, your wig might be intricately braided, layered, and even curled. Yes, curling existed, though more in the heated stick and prayer sense than any high-end salon. Some had gold thread woven in. Others boasted lapis lazuli beads. A few even came with built-in cone holders, small indentations, or comb-like inserts designed to keep your aromatic dome from sliding off mid-ritual. Wigs were so essential, they were often gifted in wills. To my beloved cousin, my second best wig, the one with fewer bees. You imagine that scene at the reading of the scroll. But while noblemen and noblewomen sported towering, styled wigs fit for cone display, working-class Egyptians had to get more creative. If they wore wigs at all, they were simpler, shorter, easier to wash, and far less prone to melting mishaps. You pass a young boy chasing goats across a courtyard. He's got a patchy wig, perched like a defeated bird on his head. No cone, just dirt. Pride, and the kind of confidence only a 10-year-old goat wrangler can have. Inside, elite homes, the wig station was sacred. Attendants oiled, combed, fluffed, and perfumed each piece daily. Some wigs had names. Others came with full instruction. Papyri. Apply wax cone only after fifth braid is wrapped. Do not wear near open flames. There are records of women having up to 10 wigs seasonal, ceremonial, romantic, casual. One noblewoman, Lady Tia, reportedly commissioned a wig so tall it required a cane for support. Historians still argue whether that was a fashion innovation or just a wildly inconvenient choice. Speaking of inconvenience, have you ever tried running in a wig while balancing a melting cone on top? No. Well, neither have most ancient Egyptians. That's the point. These cones weren't for chasing cats or rowing across the Nile. They were for sitting, lounging, reclining artfully. While someone brought you honey pastries, you continue your walk and duck into a small shrine along the riverbank. It's quiet, cool. A priest in white linen is lighting incense, and his head is shaven. Many priests shaved daily for ritual purity. No wig, but surprisingly, a small cone rests directly on his scalp, nestled like a buttery crown. He nods politely, the cone releasing a subtle trail of cedar and lily. This isn't just style, it's spiritual. Conies weren't only for nobles, they were tools of temple protocol. Priests anointed themselves with scented oils before ceremonies. Scent was considered pleasing to the gods, a way of honoring deities through cleanliness and olfactory offering. Some rituals even called for entire rooms to be infused with fragrance incense, flower garlands, and yes, melting cones on every head in the space. You close your eyes. The air smells divine earthy, slightly sweet, and cool. Despite the heat outside, you imagine being here as a worshiper, laying offerings, the wax trickling behind your ears, while chanting echoes off limestone walls. But not all scents were welcome everywhere. Etiquette mattered. There were cone taboos. Don't wear one in mourning. For example, don't wear two at once. You'd look ridiculous. And never ever wear a cone in the bathhouse. It's counterproductive and, frankly, a mess. That said, cone accidents happened. One ostracon, basically an ancient Egyptian sticky note, includes what appears to be a sarcastic doodle of a woman whose cone has fully melted down her face, captioned with something like, "She melts with envy." Whether that's fashion commentary or an early meme is anyone's guess. You step out of the shrine, blinking in the sun, and notice your own cone has reached that glorious halfway point, soft enough to perfume your surroundings, solid enough not to slide into your eye. You can feel the scent trail behind you as you walk, a subtle signature of your morning choices. Blue lotus, hint of honey, maybe a drop of sandalwood if the shopkeeper was honest. It's an odd sensation, walking around with wax slowly melting over your scalp, and yet comforting, like a gentle reminder that time is passing, the sun is moving, and somewhere down the line, you'll be clean, cool, and cone-free once more. You pass a man adjusting his wig in the reflection of a polished bronze tray. He catches your eye, gives a nod of respect. Wig recognizes wig. Cone respects cone. It's a subtle kind of camaraderie. Those who understand what it takes to wear scent, structure, and sweat all in the same moment. And as your cone begins its final descent into your collar, you smile because you, too, are melting with grace. You duck into an alley to escape the heat, and a flicker of movement catches your eye. An attendant in a linen kilt brushing down a temple floor with what appears to be a bunch of reeds tied together. It's quiet here, sacred, the sort of stillness that seems to absorb even the sound of melting cones. The scent is different, too less floral, more resinous. The air is thick with cedar, juniper, and something smoky. You're in temple territory now, and this is where perfumed cones take on a whole new layer. Divine deodorant. Religious rituals in ancient Egypt weren't just acts of devotion. They were elaborate sensory performances, and nothing was left to chance when it came to smell. Scent wasn't just about comfort. It was about purity, preparation, and proximity to the divine. After all, what God wants to be worshipped by someone who smells like yesterday's lentil stew. You round a corner and nearly bump into a priest carrying a tray of alabaster jars. He's shaved from head to toe. As expected, no hair, no dirt, no distractions. His skin gleams with oil, and nestled in the crook of his neck, barely visible, is a small, conical gleam of wax. His cone is subtler than yours, smaller, slower to melt, but still very much present. In temple life, scent was a direct offering. Incense burned constantly. Sacred oils were applied before rituals, sometimes by junior clergy, who probably spent most of their day wrist-deep in frankincense. Every act of devotion was accompanied by aroma. The gods were believed to smell offerings sometimes even before seeing them. That's why cones, or at least the perfumed oils they embodied, weren't just personal grooming. They were theological tools. Inside the temple itself, the sensory overload increases. The floor is cool stone. The ceiling, high and shadowed. Candles flicker along the walls, and somewhere deeper inside, a chorus of chants flows like water over ancient inscriptions. You feel the cones here, not just worn, but echoed. The very walls seem to sweat incense. You pass a statue of Hathor, the goddess of love, music, and conveniently perfume. Her image is serene, her headdress imposing, and at her feet, a faintly conical offering dish, etched with petals. Scent in this space does more than please. It transforms. It readies the body for prayer, opens the senses to divine presence, and, let's be honest, keeps things from getting awkward when ceremonies run 6 hours in 102 degrees heat. Melting wax becomes part of the liturgy. You pause beside a basin of cool water. An attendant dips a cloth into it, then carefully wipes down the arms of another priest who's just finished a ceremony. You catch a whiff of sandalwood and cedar mixed with human fatigue. His cone has melted almost completely now, leaving faint streaks down the side of his smooth head. That's devotion and a little dedication to smelling like heaven while baking in the heat. But cones weren't just for the clergy. Temple visitors, especially those of higher status, often wore them too. Not wearing a cone into temple grounds could be seen as, well, careless. It was like forgetting deodorant before a big job interview. You might be forgiven, but not unnoticed. There's even record of certain temple protocols involving scent identification. Specific gods were believed to prefer specific aromas. Ra liked frankincense. Bastet, the feline goddess, preferred sweet myrrh. Osiris, something earthier cedar, maybe, or juniper. Wearing the wrong cone to the wrong ritual might earn you a side eye from the priest in charge of sniffing offerings. Yes, that was probably a job. You trail behind a small group of worshippers now, each carefully dressed, their cones neat and barely melting. One older man is struggling to keep his in place. It's leaning a little too far to the left, threatening to slide down his ear like a tiny butter slide. His daughter quietly adjusts it with the tip of her finger, not missing a step. You wonder if gods noticed cone placement, or if a lopsided cone was just part of the human condition. A familiar scent floats your way. Blue lotus again. But richer this time, someone's wearing the fancy stuff. You glance around and spot a high priestess, graceful and composed, gliding past an embroidered linen. Her cone is flawless, slightly translucent, perfectly centered, releasing perfume in elegant waves with each step. It's enough to make you check your own. Yours, meanwhile, is doing its best. The wax is gathering gently along the rim of your wig, threading its way through the braids like syrup on a waffle. You smooth a hand across the top, pretending to adjust it. No one says anything. It's fine. It's totally fine. Outside the temple, the breeze returns. The sun has climbed higher, and the scent of the sacred slowly fades into the dust of everyday life. You find a shady spot beside a shrine wall and sit. For a moment, you can still smell it, all the resins, the oils, the divine effort it took to smell good enough for the gods. And it makes you think maybe that was the point. Not just about looking clean or feeling fancy, but about becoming, through fragrance, someone closer to divinity. The cone was a little crown of devotion, melting into your skin, whispering to the gods, "Hey, I'm here." And I tried. So you sit there for a moment longer, wax cooling on your shoulders, and listen to the sounds of worship, scent, and the sun all mingling in slow, fragrant harmony. The sun hangs high now, striking the whitewashed walls around you with that familiar, glaring intensity. Even the donkeys have slowed to a gentle plod, their tails flicking lazily, their eyes squinting, like they too wish they'd worn perfumed cones. You rise, stretch slightly, and continue along the temple's perimeter. Time to investigate a particularly fragrant mystery. Who exactly got to wear these cones and why? Because let's be clear, you couldn't just throw on a scented wax hat and stroll into a bakery acting like royalty. There were rules about class, occasion, and frankly, the size of your cone. Wearing a cone was a status statement. It said, "I have enough money to melt expensive things over my head without worrying about the laundry." Cones required maintenance, proper wigs, access to perfumes, and probably a personal attendant trained in cone management, which, let's face it, should be a college major. You pass a small gathering of scribes resting in the shade, their linen robes rumpled, ink-stained fingers wrapped around clay mugs of beer. Only one of them wears a cone subtle, citruse, and already beginning to trickle into his curls. That's likely the head scribe. He's got status, a corner office, well, a corner mat, and the kind of confidence only someone whose job involves telling other people how to spell crocodile in hieroglyphs can carry. The rest, probably coneless today. Not every outing called for head-melting perfume. Historians have debated just how common these cones were among the non-elite. Most evidence, especially artistic, shows them on nobles, priests, dancers, and banquet guests. The working class likely used simpler scent methods, rubbing aromatic oils directly into the scalp, wearing garlands, or hanging perfumed pouches around the neck. Still, cones were aspirational. Even if you didn't wear one, you noticed them. They represented elegance, refinement, maybe even piety, and of course, money. A jar of quality scented oil could cost as much as a month's wages for a low-level artisan, and that's before the beeswax, the wig, or the high society event where you got to show it off. You wander into a residential quarter now, one of those quiet, grid-like neighborhoods with flat-roofed homes, shaded courtyards, and rows of fig trees that offer just enough cover to make you believe in mercy. Here, the homes are modest but orderly. The air smells of bread ovens, wet clay, and the faint sweetness of drying linen. A woman steps out of a doorway with a basket of laundry balanced on her hip. She's not wearing a wig, but around her neck hangs a small sachet tied with a lotus-stamped cord. You can smell it as she passes. Simple oil, Probably diluted, but pleasant. She smiles, nods politely, and disappears into the alleyway, trailing fragrance and steam. You imagine her on a special day festival, wedding, maybe her sister's big temple service, putting on her best linen, a borrowed wig, and yes, a perfumed cone. For many Egyptians, cones weren't everyday wear. They were event specific. You didn't just wear them to market or to argue over papyrus prices. You wore them to be seen, to be fragrant on purpose. There's an old joke scratched into the plaster of a wine shop in Memphis. Only the gods wear cones at breakfast. It's funny because it's true. Wearing a cone before the sun was up would be seen as absurdly overeager, or worse, pretentious. Ancient Egypt had its unwritten etiquette, and cone timing was part of it. You pass a pair of children now, giggling as they try to balance fig leaves on their heads like cones. One declares herself queen of fragrance. The other protests that real cones smell like squashed frogs. You're not sure how to interpret that, but the energy is strong. Even among children, the cone is a symbol. It means you're important, celebrated, someone worth noticing in a sea of heat and noise. But let's return to the question of who wore them best. Women dominate the art. Banquet scenes often show rows of reclining noblewomen, their cones perfectly centered, wax streaming down wigs like fragrant lava. Their makeup is flawless, their posture poetic, their ability to recline for 6 hours without losing their cone. Honestly impressive. Some of these women likely had custom blends, scents chosen to reflect their personality, family prestige, or current mood. Blue lotus for romance, myrrh for dignity, cinnamon, and citrus for charm. Maybe a little pine resin if you really wanted to surprise someone. Men, too, wore cones especially during ceremonies, funerals, and royal events. Pharaohs themselves might have used them in private moments, but not formal. It was the gossip window, the tea before tea time. You didn't throw banquets at 3 p.m. That would be cruel, but you did sit around and talk about who fell asleep during temple services, whose cat stole someone's sandals, and what on earth Horemheb's wife was thinking with that new cone shape, square-based. Really, cone fashion was flexible, but not lawless. There were trends. Some favored short, squat cones with wide drips designed to release a quick burst of scent and vanish. Others preferred long, slender cones that melted gradually, creating slow aromatic waves that lasted into evening. The noblewoman across from you, she's clearly a fan of the high perfume, slow melt strategy. There's a pool of wax collecting gracefully along her collarbone, and she doesn't seem to mind one bit. You ask tentatively what scent she's using. She grins, barely opening her eyes. Lotus and mint, with a little almond oil to keep it from getting enthusiastic. That's cone speak for, I don't want it running down my nose again. She's been wearing them since childhood, she says. For festivals, name day feasts, temple visits. There's a kind of art to it, knowing when to apply the cone, how much to let it soften before public appearance, and which oils will linger the longest without making you smell like embalming fluid. She shifts slightly and flicks a drop of wax from her shoulder with one finger. This one's better than last week's. That blend smelled like garden salad after an hour. There's laughter around the pool. One of the other women nods sympathetically. I once had a cone melt so fast, it slipped into my mouth during a hymn. You try not to laugh. Mostly out of fear, your own cone might slide forward in protest. You tilt your head back just slightly to keep gravity on your side. And then comes the gossip. It flows with the ease of heat-dazed conversation. One woman's cousin is seeing a priest who may or may not be wearing cone-enhancing oils to impress her. Another heard that a perfumer was caught diluting lotus extract with marsh water. Scandalous. The noblewoman just murmurs, "Marsh water smells like regret," and sips her wine. You'd think the heat would ruin this kind of gathering. But here's the trick. Everyone's already melting. There's no point resisting. You just glide through it with poise, scent, and the occasional cloth to dab your temples. The cones, instead of being a burden, become part of the atmosphere. They're doing something, actively releasing scent, telling time, marking moments. You're halfway through a cone. Must be close to late afternoon. Your cone's gone. Time to freshen up and think about dinner. You lean back into the pillow. The wax on your wig has formed a gentle glaze, making it look shinier than usual. The scent has shifted a little warmer now. Less floral, more resinous as the bass notes take over. It's subtle, but comforting, like the last chapter of a favorite book. And it occurs to you, this moment, this poolside cone gossip hour, it's the real heart of daily luxury, not banquets, not royal ceremonies. Just a quiet courtyard, melting cones, and the gentle art of outlasting the sun. You close your eyes, not to sleep yet, but to listen. Faint laughter, birds, the splash of someone dipping their toes into the water. And underneath it all, a soft blend of perfumes, lotus, almond, mint, honey. It's the smell of people being their softest, slowest selves. And for the first time all day, the heat feels kind. Later that evening, just as the sun begins to slip behind the horizon and everything turns to copper and shadow, you find yourself in a small, warmly lit study. The walls are lined with papyrus scrolls, bundled herbs, and tiny jars sealed with wax. A brazier crackles gently in the corner, sending curls of incense spiraling toward the ceiling. You're here for a rare glimpse into one of the more peculiar arts of the ancient world. Perfume cone recipes. Your host, a rather animated scribe with ink-stained fingers and a disarmingly enthusiastic voice, welcomes you like an old friend. You smell faintly of blue lotus, he says, inhaling as if trying to read your day like a book with goat hair undertones. You take a seat on a reed mat beside his writing table. He unrolls a scroll, smooths the edges, and reveals rows of carefully drawn hieroglyphs. Today, he says with a wink, we blend. Crafting a perfume cone wasn't just chemistry. It was a ritual, equal parts art, science, and social guesswork. Ancient recipes ranged from deeply spiritual to what if we boiled flowers and hoped for the best. Tonight's recipe is an old one, supposedly passed down from a Theban perfumer who once scented the hair of a queen. It starts with beeswax grated and gently warmed until it forms a soft, sticky base. Then comes the oil. Your host chooses almond oil, prized for its clean burn and soft finish. It will carry the scent without overpowering it. Next, the fragrances. He lifts the lid from a tiny alabaster jar and lets you sniff. Blue lotus, he murmurs, steeped in date wine, aged 6 weeks. Smells like dusk. You agree. It smells like memory, like something a dream would leave behind. Into the pot it goes. Then he crushes dried petals with a stone mortar rose. Lily, maybe some acacia. You help, and end up with a smudge of powder across your sleeve. You'll carry that smell for days, he says. Be warned, dogs will follow you. Next, he scrapes what looks like hardened resin into a fine powder. Immerse, he says, for grounding, too much. And you smell like a tomb, too little. And you smell like a fruit stand. This is where the recipe becomes odd. He reaches for a small dish covered with linen and uncovers it slowly. Pigeon essence, he announces, solemnly. You blink. I'm sorry. What? No one knows what it actually is, he says, Might be pigeon droppings, might be something they secreted during mating season, might just be a scam started by a priest with a good sales pitch. You decide to trust the process. He adds a single drop, only one, into the mix, and then stirs everything slowly. The wax begins to melt fully, becoming a rich, golden liquid that smells like honeyed riverbanks and temple offerings. Now, he says, the shape. He pulls out a wooden mold shaped like a tiny pyramid with a flattened base. You watch as he pours the mixture in carefully, letting it cool just enough to hold its form. The final touch, a lotus petal pressed gently into the base before it hardens an aromatic signature. He says, this whole process, it's not just for special occasions. For the wealthy, perfumers, like your new friend, were on retainer. They develop personalized blends, experiment with new resins, and even trial seasonal cones, warmer notes for winter festivals, cooler herbs for the scorching summer months. One archived recipe on a scrap of astrakhan includes instructions for a cone designed to encourage conversation, repel insects, and improve singing voice. Historians still argue whether that last part was wishful thinking or exceptionally aggressive marketing. You ask him if cones were ever used medicinally. Absolutely, he says, opening a side scroll. Some cones were meant to ease headaches, others to purify the blood, or so they claimed. There was even one for, how shall I say this, encouraging fertility. Strong notes of fennel. Very awkward results. You try not to imagine a failed romantic dinner ruined by runaway fennel fumes. Not all recipes were documented. Some were passed down orally, guarded by families, especially those connected to temple work or elite perfumery guilds. Smell was power. The right scent could influence moods, bless offerings, or if gossip is to be believed, get you invited back to the palace. Your host finishes the cone and hands it to you, still warm and slightly pliable. Let it rest overnight, he says, then wear it to the next full moon gathering. But don't fall asleep in it. One of my clients woke up stuck to his own wig. You thank him and rise to leave, the scent already seeping into your skin. Outside, the sky has deepened into velvet, stars just beginning to blink awake. You walk home slowly, the cone tucked in a linen pouch, your mind swirling with notes of resin and rose, oil and mystery. And for the first time, you feel like someone who doesn't just wear scent. You understand it. It's no longer just wax on your head, it's history on your hands. As you step back into the glow of the early evening streets, your linen robe fluttering with the gentle breeze stirred up by the Nile's hush. The world seems to have taken a collective sigh. The light softens, the smells mellow, and though your scalp is slick with what's left of your earlier cone, you feel refreshed. You pass children playing a game with stones and reeds, and street vendors softly calling out their last sales figs, dates, cool beer in clay jugs, a roasted duck leg that smells better than any perfume. But tonight, your curiosity turns toward the other half of this story, the ones without cones. While the upper class shimmered with waxy fragrance, what about the everyday Egyptians who still had to work, sweat, and survive the sun without the benefit of perfumed scalp drip? You head toward the market quarter, where stalls still buzz, and the smells hit like a papyrus scroll of sensation. Fermented fish paste, sharp onion, wet linen, and the tang of goat. But tucked between all this, little flashes of ingenuity. The common folk didn't have cones, but they had their own tricks. You stop at a stall where a woman is fanning strips of linen on a rope. She dips one in a clay pot, wrings it out, and slaps it dramatically against the side of the stall, letting the breeze do the rest. You catch the scent of mint and vinegar. She catches your look and nods. Cooling wrap, she says, we tie them around the neck. Keeps the sun off. Smells not bad either. Genius. Not everyone could afford resin-soaked beeswax, but vinegar, infused with herbs, manageable, practical, reusable. You buy one and drape it over your neck. The chill, hitting your sun-warmed skin like a divine blessing. Further down, you spot a group of fishermen unloading a net, tangled with riverweed and grumbling about the scent. One of them rubs a palmful of crushed lemongrass behind his ears, muttering about keeping the flies off. You try not to breathe too deeply as a particularly fragrant eel slides past. You pass a weaver's hut next. Inside, two young men are pounding reeds into fibers while singing a chant in sync. Overhead, bundles of dried herbs hang upside down basil, mint, maybe sweet flag, not just for air freshening. Some of these, you realize, are probably mixed with the clay they use to line their walls, the scent subtly baking into the structure each day. Ancient architecture wasn't just functional, it could smell nice, too. The walls in some homes were daubed with mixes that included crushed flowers or resinous woods. When warmed by the sun, the walls themselves would emit fragrance, not strong like a cone, but gentle domestic like a hug from the house. There's more. One boy races by, carrying a fan woven from papyrus stalks and dipped in something that smells like lavender and lemon peel. A breeze kicks up behind him, trailing scent like a makeshift perfume parade. You're impressed. Clearly, he's found a loophole. Why wear the scent when you can fling it? You stop at a corner tavern where tired workers are gathered on reed mats, sipping cool beer and fanning their feet. A few are chewing something small white sticks, licorice root, naturally sweet and used as both a breath freshener and a mild pick-me-up. One man holds his stick like it's a gift from Osiris himself. He catches your look and offers you one with a grin. For when the cone's too rich for your blood, he says, gesturing to your wax-glazed wig. You bite into the root. It's earthy, sweet, oddly numbing, not unpleasant. So, the truth settles in. Just because most Egyptians couldn't afford a cone didn't mean they gave up on scent. They adapted, innovated, created smaller rituals of smell that suited their means. Bundles of herbs in sandals, crushed petals, rubbed on wrists, minty vinegar cloths, licorice twigs. Scent was democratic. It just wore different outfits. You overhear a joke from a passing merchant. Rich men drip wax, we drip sweat. Laughter follows, not bitter, just knowing. You watch an older woman lighting a small cone of incense outside her door, the smoke curling upward like a question. She's barefoot, wearing a simple linen tunic, but her bearing is proud. You notice she's dabbed something behind her ears. Oil, perhaps, maybe stolen from temple refuse, maybe homemade, doesn't matter. She smells like herself, like earth and myrrh and survival. You continue on, past makeshift shrines and sleeping dogs, toward the edge of the city, where the palms grow wild. Here, the air changes again, cleaner, softer. Someone's burning dried orange peel and tamarisk bark natural pest control that smells better than it has any right to. Even nature, it seems, wears perfume. It's easy to forget that the history of scent wasn't only written by nobles with golden cones. It was also whispered into linen by housewives with vinegar tricks, ground into the palms of brickmakers, hidden in sandals, tucked into bread ovens by wives who knew the power of good-smelling crust. You reach the riverbank as the last of the light melts into the horizon. You sit in silence, the breeze tugging gently at your tunic. Your cone has all but disappeared now, its scent mingling with clay and river and evening. And for all the opulence you've seen today, all the elite fragrance rituals, and recipe scrolls. This moment, this patch of cool sand, this breeze, thick with tamarisk, feels just as meaningful. Because even without cones, the people of Egypt knew how to beat the heat with creativity, humor, and just a pinch of crushed mint. And really, what more could you ask for? You awaken the next day in a new setting, one of those rare moments when you've been invited into a proper elite villa, the kind that looks plain from the outside, but unfolds into elegance once you step through the gate. The sun hasn't quite reached its peak yet, and already the house is performing its quiet miracle. It's cool, not icebox cold, of course, but in a place where the breeze is more theory than reality. This villa feels like the architectural equivalent of a sigh. You shuffle through the shaded entryway, past high whitewashed walls painted with reeds and lotus blooms, and into a central courtyard filled with low splashing fountains, potted palms, and the thick scent of early morning myrrh. Here's the secret the elite didn't write on their tomb walls. It wasn't just the cones that beat the heat, it was the house itself. Elite homes were engineered for temperature control with impressive creativity. The thick mud brick walls, insulated like champs. Windows were small and often placed high to minimize the sun's glare. The layout, all about airflow. Courtyards caught the breeze. Hallways directed it. And rooms were arranged so that the back chambers reserved for rest and afternoon naps stayed shaded nearly all day. You pad barefoot across smooth stone tiles, cooler than expected, and peek into a bedroom just off the garden. A servant is pulling down a woven reed curtain, revealing a simple sleeping mat, a basket of cones, and a low table with no surprise jars of oils. The room smells faintly of cedar, linen, and someone's cone from yesterday. A little melted wax clings to the corner of the mat like a sleepy souvenir. Even indoors, cones had their place. They weren't always worn in rooms like this. They were sometimes left in shallow bowls near pillows, allowed to melt slowly and scent the air overnight. A kind of prehistoric diffuser, if you will. The scent soaked into the linens, the walls, the dreams. You pass through a kitchen area next. It's quiet. Most of the cooking happened earlier in the day, when the heat was still negotiable. The air is warm but tolerable. Bundles of herbs hang from the rafters. Coriander, dill, chamomile, not just for flavor. In here, they pull double duty as odor control and fly deterrent. It's practical and oddly poetic. A woman sits in the corner, slicing date paste into neat cubes. She glances at you and gestures toward the nearest doorway. Best air comes from the mosaic room, she says, not looking up. You follow her advice and step into what must be the family's formal reception room. Its beautiful white walls painted with delicate vines, a high skylight filtering in buttery light, and at the center, a tiny channel of water trickling between floor tiles. The breeze here is soft and, more importantly, it exists. This is where the family gathers at the height of heat. The water feature is no mere decoration. It cools the air through evaporation. The breeze skims across the wet surface and delivers a faint, fragrant chill that feels like a blessing. You sit. An attendant enters quietly and sets down a tray with a chilled ceramic cup of sweet beer and a perfumed cloth for your neck. The scent jasmine, mint, and a whisper of neroli triggers a memory of yesterday's cone gossip circle. Your head tilts reflexively, wondering if today's cone is still balanced properly. It is, but just barely. The home itself is doing what the cone used to, making you bearable to be around. One historian once described these villas as inverted oases, man-made coolness in a sea of relentless heat. The floors were often polished or tiled to hold the chill. The roofs layered in palm fronds or plastered mud to reflect sunlight. Some wealthier homes even had jars of water placed strategically in corners to aid in air cooling primitive climate control using evaporation and patience. There are records of families suspending damp cloths over open doorways and fanning them throughout the day to keep temperatures tolerable. Some used crushed alabaster on walkways to reflect light. Others swore by strategically placed pots of citrus peel and dried myrrh, which both scented and subtly cooled the space. You wander into a side room, a study. Perhaps scrolls line the wall in cubby holes, and a small breeze rustles a hanging reed curtain. Someone's left a wig stand near the window, complete with a freshly cleaned hairpiece and a brand new, untouched cone already set in place. It gleams slightly in the light. The cone is for later, you assume, or maybe for someone preparing for a dinner party. Either way, its presence feels ceremonial, deliberate, even in a house engineered to fight the sun. The cone still has a role. It's the final flourish, the olfactory punctuation mark on a day carefully managed for comfort. Back in the courtyard, you catch a glimpse of the lady of the house reclining near the pool, an open scroll in her lap and her cone mid-melt. She doesn't look up as you pass, but you smell her a crisp burst of lemon balm and cedar that makes the air feel 10 degrees cooler. You realize then, cones weren't just tools for staying cool. They were a statement of how effortlessly cool you could appear. To wear a melting cone and still look composed was the mark of true refinement. The cone, the house, the servants fanning and perfuming it was all a performance of poise. And like all performances, it had a backstage. You sneak a glance into the servants' quarters before leaving simpler, smaller, but still smartly designed. Even they had strategies. Shade nets over sleeping mats, pots of cool river clay tucked near beds, and bundles of crushed mint laid on windowsills. Cones were rare here, but the scent game still strong. You step back out into the street, the sun a little lower now, the heat just barely backing off. Your cone is nearly gone, but its scent lingers, clinging to your collar and trailing behind you like a ghost in sandals. And as you walk, you realize the real power of the cone wasn't just in the wax or the perfume. It was in how the people built their lives around its melt. Your feet carry you along a dusty side path now, away from the wide city streets and elite compounds, toward a quieter quarter where the houses are smaller, lower, closer together, each one casting precious shade for its neighbor. The air feels slower here, like it's settled in for a nap and won't be stirred until the sun gives up. It's the perfect time to explore a sacred Egyptian tradition, the midday nap, and the art of chasing shade. You're not just strolling anymore. You're looking, seeking that perfect spot, part cool stone, part dappled light, part peace. Because in ancient Egypt, the hours between noon and late afternoon weren't about productivity. They were about survival and rest, the term historians sometimes use, though the Egyptians themselves might have just called it common sense, is the midday rest. And yes, it was universal. Whether you were a laborer or a landowner, by the time the sun started throwing elbows, everyone knew it was time to stop, sit, and preferably lie down near something cool. You pass a small bakery, its doors wide open to let out heat. Inside, a boy fans himself with a bit of woven palm, his head resting against a sack of flour. A woman nearby leans over a dough table, sprinkling herbs on flatbread and yawning hard enough to startle the family cat. Everyone is moving like molasses, but intentionally, and no surprise, the scent here is oddly delicious. Warm flour, sun-dried herbs, and someone's fading cone, a lovely mix of coriander and dust. Midday naps weren't random luxuries. They were part of a carefully choreographed daily rhythm. wake before the sun, work through the morning, pause during the deadly stretch, then resume activity in the early evening. It wasn't laziness, it was logistics, after all. When the air turns thick enough to chew, and the ground is hot enough to bake clay pots, your best move is to lie down and pretend time doesn't exist. You find a quiet fig tree with thick, spreading branches, a small bench, really just a worn slab of limestone rests beneath it, and you sink down with gratitude. The stone is still warm, but mercifully shaded. Above you, figs rustle softly in the breeze, not quite ripe but already fragrant. You inhale slowly. Here, under the fig tree, you imagine what it would be like to nap like an Egyptian. You remove your wig gently, carefully, to keep from smearing what's left of your cone, and tuck it into your lap. The scent lingers, soft and faint now, like the echo of music. You lie back, the stone cool beneath your spine, and allow your eyes to close. Nearby, two men are doing the same. One fans himself lazily with a reed fan. The other has tucked a cloth over his face to keep the light out. Their conversation is little more than slow grumbles and the occasional joke about who snores louder. You hear a woman humming somewhere behind a garden wall, perhaps while stirring something over a slow fire. The song is ancient, but familiar. Maybe it's a lullaby. Maybe it's a recipe. The air smells like shade now, and shade, in ancient Egypt, had its own flavor. The scent of fig leaves, the faint oiliness of stone, a trace of sandalwood and earth. It wasn't just absence of light, it was its own atmosphere. Shade was curated. Shade was used. People planted trees, not just for beauty, but for fragrance, for canopy, for temperature control. In wealthier homes, fig trees and date palms were arranged to cast perfect shadows during key nap hours. In temples, carved colonnades created deliberate sun-dappling corridors. Shade wasn't incidental. It was architecture with a purpose, and the cone, it still worked here, just more slowly. In the cooler air, its melt would ease into a crawl. The scent would linger longer, fade softer, a sleepy whisper of who you were earlier in the day. You wonder how many cones were lost to midday naps, forgotten, flattened, or found stuck to a pillow hours later. The scholars among us might debate whether ancient Egyptians had pillows in the modern sense. Most people used headrests, curved wooden or stone supports, designed to keep your head elevated and your wig unwrinkled. You see one nearby now, resting beside a sleeping child, who's clearly given up and gone full belly down in the dirt, head on a folded tunic. The headrest, decorational at best. You feel yourself dozing, if only in sympathy with your surroundings. But before you drift too far, let's consider another part of Egypt's cooling toolkit: dampness. One often overlooked detail in ancient cooling methods was the use of wet materials. People soaked mats in river water, then draped them over windows, doorways, even their own shoulders. As the water evaporated, it pulled heat with it, offering brief, blessed relief. Some even placed wet mats beneath their beds before sleeping. Early air conditioning. Egyptian edition. In more modest homes, clay pots filled with water were placed near open windows. The breeze passed over the cool surface, and if you were lucky, delivered a whisper of chilled air. This is the same principle behind the pot-in-pot refrigerator still used in parts of the world today. You sit up slightly and notice someone nearby doing just that, fanning air across a water jug to send a breeze toward their sleeping grandfather. It's an act of love, really, and a practical one. The elder's cone, barely more than a puddle, now still smells faintly of mint and myrrh, a scent of protection, a scent of rest. Even pets knew how to nap well. A cat stretches across a cool patch of tile nearby, blinking slowly, then rolling onto its back with a level of vulnerability only available to creatures who know they're worshipped. Eventually, the sun begins to shift again. The light softens by a degree, and somewhere far off, a conch shell sounds, maybe temple time, maybe a merchant's call. People begin to stir. A wig is straightened, a fan tucked back into a belt. Conans that made it through the nap are gently reshaped or replaced. You feel a faint slickness at the back of your neck. Your own cone has begun melting again now that you're upright. You smile, because even in stillness, even in sleep, the Egyptians scented their lives with purpose. And now that you've rested, it's time to rejoin the world, lightly perfumed, slightly cooler, and just drowsy enough to appreciate what comes next. The sun has dropped a few fingers lower in the sky now, and the light has shifted from harsh white to the honeyed gold of late afternoon. You follow the breeze again, this time toward the edge of the necropolis, where the city of the living gives way to the realm of the remembered. The scent in the air is drier now. Dust, stone, a whiff of embalming resin, lingering like the faintest echo of incense. It's time to explore how perfumed cones didn't just adorn the heads of partygoers, but accompanied people all the way into the afterlife. Because yes, even the dead in ancient Egypt wore cones. Well, sort of. You approach a tomb chapel, modest by noble standards, but still finely crafted, sunken into the earth, with carved pillars at the entrance and a faded mural of offerings painted on the plaster inside. You duck your head to enter. The coolness hits you like a wave. It's quiet, still, but as your eyes adjust, so does your imagination. On the wall is a scene you've come to recognize. Banquet guests in rows, women with long braids and serene expressions, each with a familiar pale cone centered atop their wig. Wax mid-drip, scent made permanent in pigment. It's not just an aesthetic flourish. These images had meaning. They told the gods this person lived well, smelled delightful, and was worthy of continued comfort in the field of reeds. And so the cone followed them into death. In some tombs, small alabaster jars have been found near the head of the body, filled with oils or softened wax, possible funerary cones, or perhaps the raw ingredients. There are wigs and burials with traces of perfumed residue along the braids. We may not have found a perfectly preserved cone with a label that says to be worn on forehead. Please refrigerate before use. But we've seen enough clues to know they mattered. You move through the small chamber and notice a table laid with offerings. Dried bread, onions, lotus flowers, and a single flattened cone-shaped object molded in clay. Symbolic food for the soul, and scent, too. Because in Egypt, the senses didn't stop at death. The afterlife was imagined as a continuation of the good life, just with better shade and no taxes. You'd still eat, drink, kiss, and yes, smell. One funerary text even describes the deceased arriving at the next world clothed in light, scented with sweet unguents. Another includes a prayer, asking the gods to breathe upon me the perfume of eternity. Now that's a candle you'd buy. You sit near the wall, eyes tracing the images of cone-wearing nobles enjoying the eternal banquet. Musicians play, pets curl at their feet. Attendant pour wine. Everyone is radiant, serene, and thoroughly perfumed. There's an open debate among historians about how literally to take these painted cones. Some argue they were metaphorical visual shorthand for purification and luxury. Others insist they depict real practices preserved in sacred spaces, because scent was part of the soul's transition. The truth is probably both. In a culture where scent carried spiritual weight, showing a person as sweet-smelling was a kind of olfactory eulogy, the cone said. They were loved. They were refined. They had access to the sacred oils that marked a life well lived. You pass by a second burial niche and notice something charming etched into the wall. Near the figure of the deceased is a smaller figure, a servant with a cone that's slipping slightly down their forehead. Was it a joke? A moment of realism, a reminder that even in the afterlife, cones melt. It's little moments like these that remind you the ancient Egyptians had humor woven into their eternity. They imagined their lives extended beyond death, but not sanitized. They brought with them their pets, their favorite foods, their instruments, and their perfumes. In fact, entire perfume recipes were sometimes included in tomb goods. Imagine being so committed to smelling good that you bring instructions with you to the afterlife. Please ensure I smell of cinnamon and lotus. While haunting, you leave the tomb slowly, letting your eyes readjust to the fading daylight. The air feels warmer now, sharper. You glance behind you, and for a moment, you imagine the mural figures waving politely, cones intact, sending you off with a faint trail of resin and memory. At a small bench near the cemetery path, you pause to rest. A woman nearby tends to a tiny family altar, laying fresh flowers and dabbing oil on a small ceramic cone set atop a painted bust. It's a touching act. Her cone is long gone, but her scent-faint rosewater and tamarisk is still with her, and you realize scent is remembrance. It's continuity. It's the idea that someone, somewhere, will still know what you loved, what you wore, what flower followed you into every room even long after you're gone. You sit quietly for a few moments more, letting the breeze carry you back. Your own cone is nearly finished now, just a soft wax trace in your hair, but its story still unfolding. And tonight, you'll dream of the banquet beyond time, full of sweet air, endless shade, and cones that never quite melt away. You leave the necropolis behind, the scent of the tombs still faint on your skin, frankincense, dust, and something that feels like old stories. But the city is waking up again, not in the way it does in the morning, all bustle and brightness, but with a slower kind of energy. The golden hour, gossip hour. And this evening, you're about to learn that cones weren't only for the gods or the dead, they played their part in courtship too. You find yourself in a small garden courtyard behind a musician's house. There are cushions scattered around low tables, fig wine flowing freely, and soft laughter weaving through the palm trees. You're here for a quiet evening gathering friends, flirtation, a little harp music, and apparently one very enthusiastic attempt at scented seduction. The hostess greets you with a conspiratorial grin and gestures for you to sit. You might want to brace yourself, she murmurs, tilting her head toward the far side of the garden. There, perched delicately on a carved bench, is a young man in a pristine white tunic, a fresh wig oiled to perfection, and on his head, a massive, gleaming cone. It's practically architectural, wide base, sharp peak, and visibly melting. It smells like cinnamon, lotus, and ambition. He's trying very hard not to look like he's trying very hard. A few of the other guests are politely ignoring it, sipping their drinks and discussing temple politics. But the target of his affections, a dancer seated across from him, is clearly aware. She arches an eyebrow every time he adjusts his posture to better waft his scent in her direction. Perfume cones, it seems, had romantic potential. We don't have papyrus love letters saying, "Your cone enchanted me," but we do know scent played a huge role in attraction. The Egyptians equated good smells with beauty, purity, and desirability. Perfumed oils were used in intimate settings, and certain ingredients like blue lotus, cinnamon, and honey were even considered aphrodisiacs. Some texts describe lovers gifting perfume cones or scented sachets. Others hint at a more playful use, dabbing oil along the collarbone to draw attention, or offering someone your personal cone as a token. One poem from the New Kingdom playfully suggests that a man's lover is as fragrant as a garden. Her scent upon my hands, that could mean anything, but you get the idea. Back in the garden, our cone-smitten hero leans a little closer to his muse, causing a sudden drip of wax to slide down the side of his wig and land squarely in his wine. He doesn't notice. She does. There's a beat of silence, then a delicate cough. Then she leans forward with a perfectly timed line. Your perfume is bold. He smiles, clearly choosing to interpret that as a compliment. You sip your drink and watch the social ballet unfold. It's part comedy, part chemistry. The cone isn't a seduction guarantee, but it is a tool, an olfactory conversation, a way to say, I came here to impress. You catch the hostess's eye, and she grins again. Last week, it was a sandalwood blend. Gave me a headache. This one's better. Warmer, less overwhelming. You ask, she shrugs. Marginally, he still smells like an altar. But the dancer seems to be warming to him. Maybe it's the persistence. Maybe it's the cinnamon. Maybe it's just that in a world where the days are long and the sun relentless, someone who goes to the trouble of crafting the perfect scent deserves at least a smile. The Egyptians didn't write dating manuals, but they left behind clues. Tomb paintings show couples reclining side by side, both wearing cones, sharing wine, flowers, music. Scent was everywhere in these scenes, not just symbolic, but sensory. You imagine two lovers whispering across pillows, the wax of their cones slowly mingling, leaving traces of each other on their wigs. There's even a preserved love poem that reads, my heart flutters at your fragrance. More than 1,000 perfumes of Punt, of course, being the ancient source of some of the most exotic and costly aromatics in the known world. That's like saying, you smell better than imported designer fragrance. You lean back and breathe deeply. Around you, the garden buzzes gently. A few of the guests are reapplying oils, rubbing them into their collarbones or wrists. No one mentions it. It's just part of the atmosphere, like pouring wine or adjusting your sandals. One of the musicians begins to play softly. The dancer stands and moves toward the center of the garden, hips swaying gently in time. Her cone stays perfectly balanced, slim, steady, probably glued down with a prayer and a well-placed hairpin. The young man watches, slack-jawed, as if caught in a perfume-fueled trance. The scent changes again, faintly floral, then suddenly smoky, as someone lights a nearby incense cone. You're wrapped in it now. Perfume, music, moonlight. Every part of the evening has been designed for softness. And then, as the dancer passes close to her admirer, she reaches out just briefly and adjusts his cone by the tip, straightening it slightly. That's it. That's the moment. Half flirtation, half mercy. You smile, because in ancient Egypt, sometimes, love began with a cone that was just a bit too optimistic. You wake the next morning, still smiling at the memory of last night's perfumed performance. The dancer's graceful correction of her suitor's melting cone has now joined the great mental archive of small, perfect social moments. You stretch, breathe in the faint scent of lotus and cedar still lingering in your wig, and shuffle toward the nearest shady street, because today, you're headed somewhere a little unexpected. You're going to look at advertisements. Well, not billboards, or TikToks exactly, but the ancient equivalent bits of papyrus, ostraca, market chatter, and public gossip that give us glimpses of how perfume, particularly cones, were marketed to the masses. You make your way through a bustling market square. It's already busy, with scribes negotiating over scrolls, butchers loudly swatting flies, and perfume sellers. Oh yes, they're out in full force. There's one now, standing proudly beside a folding table, stacked with tiny ceramic vials and baskets of soft wax cones nestled in cloth. Her tunic is simple but spotless, her cone slim and slowly melting, releasing a faint but deliberate scent of mint and date flower. This isn't just a shop, it's a performance. Try the cone that wooed a scribe and impressed a tax collector, she calls out, lifting a waxy dome between her fingers, with tamarisk to cool the scalp and enough blue lotus to make your neighbor jealous. You sidle closer and browse. Each cone is labeled with a little painted glyph or a catchy name. You find River Breeze, Delight, Mint, and Lemongrass, Temple Whispers, Myrrh, and Cedar. Two Drip Kiss, a subtle honeyed cone with a flirtatious top note, Queen's Hour, frankincense, and almond, ideal for reclining dramatically, Sandstorm Shield Pungent, probably more bug repellent than fragrance. You pick one up and smell it. It's bold, like cinnamon, having a loud conversation with roasted fig. The seller grins. That's summer boast, good for banquets, funerals, or impressing in-laws. Marketing in ancient Egypt wasn't mass-produced, but it was strategic. Sellers played to aspirations. They offered class-coded products, simpler, cheaper cones for daily wear, fancier blends for temple visits or seduction attempts. A few even included healing claims, promising to ease headaches, promote good dreams, or calm unruly thoughts. Some cones came with little poem tags. The original ad copy, one you find reads, "Melt upon me, lotus sweet, and draw his eyes, his breath, his feet." Catchy, and a little dangerous. The sellers knew their audience. They played on emotional hooks, attraction, social status, and even spiritual favor. One cone, carved into the shape of a falcon's head, is marked with Divine Blend Ra's preferred scent. You're not sure who decided what Ra preferred, but the price tag says they're very confident. You pass another stall, where a young apprentice is demonstrating cone placement using a wig on a wooden stand. She carefully angles it, balances the cone just so, and steps back. "Notice the tilt," she says proudly. "Too far forward, and you'll drip into your eyes. Too far back, and you'll scent only your pillow." Someone claps politely. A passing goat sniffs the display and is shooed away. You pause at a clay wall covered in hand-drawn posters, literally drawn, probably by local scribes, with flair for line art. One shows a noblewoman reclining beside a pile of melting cones, the caption underneath reading, "She chooses cone of the south wind. Why don't you?" Another simply says, "Don't show up coneless." Public shame marketing. Effective then. Effective now, of course. Not everyone was taken in by the hype. You overhear two older men sitting nearby, sharing a jar of beer. "Back in my day," one says, "you rubbed lavender behind your ears and called it charm." The other nods. "Now it's all lotus this and cinnamon that. Melt, melt, melt. Where's the mystery? Gone with the bees." The first says grimly, "And yet even they wear small cones. Faint, understated, likely homemade. No one, it seems, is completely immune to the allure of smelling just a little better than expected." You pass by a perfume shop with a more scholarly vibe. Scrolls hang from the doorframe, each one a recipe or testimonial. The owner is a former temple scribe, and he greets you with pride. "I don't sell scent," he says. "I sell experience." He hands you a scroll. Aromatic blend to soften the heart of an angry father-in-law. Tested twice. Worked once. The scroll is brief. 1 part almond oil, 1 part rose sap, a drop of wine-soaked fig. Apply before dinner, but after prayer. Simple, but who's to argue with results? You linger, watching others browse. A bride-to-be is choosing between cones. For her wedding day, her mother is insisting on the traditional temple bloom, while she eyes something called sweet reeds at dusk. A teenage boy is buying his first cone, looking both thrilled and terrified. The seller offers to size it for him, so you don't tip forward when bowing. And finally, you spot the cone you didn't know you were looking for. It's labeled Traveler's Grace. The seller explains, it was blended for long days on the road, notes of thyme, cooling myrtle, and river sedge oil. It's faint, clean, and oddly comforting, like the breeze on a shaded boat deck. You buy it, and as you walk away from the market, cone in hand, you reflect on just how much these waxy little domes carried. Not just scent, but story, desire, marketing brilliance, and a sense that in every melted drip, someone, somewhere, tried their best to leave a fragrant impression. You leave the market behind, the papyrus jingles of cone sellers fading into the distance, and head toward the docks. The Nile glimmers ahead, dappled with boats long, narrow vessels with painted eyes on their prows and sails that catch the lazy evening breeze like giant, gossiping wings. You're here to follow a different kind of story now, not about how cones were worn, but how they moved from the perfumed fingertips of elite Egyptians to the forests, mines, and traders that made them possible. Because for all their dainty glamour, cones were global travelers, and like any fashionable item, their ingredients came with drama. The smell hits you first, a mix of fresh water, damp rope, and a hint of resin. A ship's crew is unloading cargo. Baskets of frankincense, jars sealed with beeswax, tightly wrapped bundles of dried lotus petals. Each one holds the potential for a dozen cones, or, if sold smartly, one very expensive one. You step aside as a trader waves instructions to his crew, barking out place names like a travel scroll. Punt, Byblos, Nubia, Canaan. You're hearing the hidden geography of scent. Let's talk ingredients. Frankincense and myrrh. Those were imported from the southern lands, what the Egyptians called Punt, probably modern-day Somalia or Eritrea. The journey was long, winding, and not without camel-based grievances. Resin came in crumbly yellowish clumps that smelled a little like spice, a little like sacred rituals, and a lot like prophet. Blue lotus, native to Egypt, thankfully. But drying and preserving it properly was an art form. If you picked it too early, it lost its punch. Too late, and it smelled like pond regrets. So lotus farmers timed their harvests precisely, usually at dawn, when the petals were still cool with dew. Beeswax, that's where things get sticky, literally. Bees had to be nurtured, their hives protected, and their wax rendered in low, slow heat, so it wouldn't scorch the scent. Larger estates had their own hives, while smaller perfumers bought wax in blocks, tested for purity by poking it with a warm reed and sniffing for smoke. Almond and castor oils were pressed locally, though almond was favored for its lighter scent, and castor, while effective, had a tendency to make you smell like a medicinal poultice if used too generously. But sandalwood, that smooth, woody, sleep-in-your-skin scent, that had to come from India or somewhere equally far-flung, and therein lies the drama. Egyptian scribes recorded entire arguments over the cost of imported oils. Letters between traders and temple officials include increasingly grumpy lines like the shipment of cedar has not arrived, and my wife smells of olives again, or this myrrh is half dust, and your priest will not stop sneezing. You follow a trader onto his boat, invited, thankfully, and handed a cloth to dab sweat from your brow. The hold is dark and cool. Inside, amphorae line the walls, sealed with wax and labeled with symbols denoting scent blends for ceremonies, for lovers, for rebirth. Strong use only outdoors. He lifts the lid on one and lets you sniff. The aroma is thick and resinous, with just a whisper of honey. This one took 3 months to make. He says, not bragging, just proud. Carried the frankincense from Punt, traded cedar in Gaza, pressed the oil in Memphis. You believe him. It smells like 3 borders and a tax dispute. The journey of a single cone wasn't just a recipe. It was a map. Trade routes fanned out like perfume trails, down the Red Sea coast, across the Sinai, up through the Levant, looping back by sea or overland in caravans that smelled faintly better than most. And the politics, oh, the politics. Entire treaties included clauses about incense access. Temples negotiated exclusive contracts for specific scent blends. One tale, possibly exaggerated, describes a noble who tried to hoard a year's worth of sandalwood and was promptly exiled to a less fragrant estate. Historians still argue whether this was a cautionary tale or just the earliest record of a failed MLM scheme. You leave the boat and follow the crates up a ramp where port officials are inspecting imports. One pokes a cone mold with a stick, sniffs dramatically, and scribbles something on a papyrus scroll. Another dabs a drop of oil on his wrist, fans it, and nods solemnly. Quality control is serious business. A young apprentice runs by carrying a satchel of fresh blue lotus petals, likely destined for a temple or private perfumer. He's sweaty, harried, and smells incredible. You make a mental note to ask where he got his oil blend. All around you, the scent economy hums. It wasn't just fashion, it was industry. Perfume was taxed, traded, stolen, gifted, and argued over. Cones were both luxury and labor. Every elegant drip down a noble's wig represented weeks of picking, pressing, scraping, sealing, blending, shipping, and whispering. I swear it's fresh, and still people paid, because smelling good meant status, purity, divinity, and on particularly lucky evenings, romance. You pause at the riverbank and take out your own fresh cone, the one you bought yesterday, the traveler's grace. You hold it for a moment, marveling at how something so small contains the echo of forests, rivers, boats, bees, and the hands of strangers from distant lands. You place it gently on your wig, adjust it just so, and feel it settle. As the sun dips behind the palm trees and the Nile begins to glint like a burnished mirror, you smell the first hint of river sedge oil and thyme rising from your crown. And you remember you're wearing history. You walk slowly now, the breeze curling around your neck, bringing with it the fading scent of your cone and the faint memory of the docks. The sun has dipped low, and the streets have taken on that soft, glowy look where everything seems more peaceful, more cinematic, more questionable. Because tonight, your path leads somewhere unexpected. You've been invited to a gathering of thinkers, scribes, priests, and artists deep in the back of a Theban courtyard. There are scrolls, there is beer, there is a lot of mumbling, and, as it turns out, there is controversy. You sit cross-legged near a low table scattered with reed pens and half-eaten honey cakes. An elder scribe clears his throat and squints at the room. Were the cones even real? He asks. A collective gasp, a cough. Someone spills wine. Yes, tonight you've wandered into a scholarly throwdown. The ongoing debate about whether perfumed cones were actual wearable objects or merely symbolic artistic flourishes. Welcome to Cone Truthers Anonymous, Let's break it down. On one side, you've got the literalists, the cone realists. These are the people who point to all the tomb paintings, murals, and bas reliefs depicting elegantly posed Egyptians with cones melting delicately down their wigs. Why paint it? They say, if it wasn't a thing. They point out that no other fashion element was so consistently repeated across time and class. Rich, poor, priest, dancer, guest at a feast. They're all shown with cones, often mid-melt, sometimes lopsided, occasionally, hilariously, sliding into someone's eye. You saw that mural earlier. Don't pretend you didn't giggle. Then there are the skeptics. These are the folks who love a good metaphor. It's not a literal object. One argues, waving a scroll like a conductor's baton, it's a symbol of purification, of scent, of pleasure, a shorthand, a visual perfume cloud. They note that, despite all the artwork, no fully intact perfumed cone has ever been excavated from a burial site. No waxy domes preserved in pristine condition. No detailed cone care manuals. No cone holders engraved goods. No wigs with dedicated wax grooves. Just residue, traces, hints. Historians still argue whether that lack of evidence proves non-existence, or just the fact that melted wax doesn't fossilize well, after all. How many candles from the 1800s have you seen perfectly preserved? And so, the debate swirls like incense smoke over a temple altar. One scribe stands and gestures dramatically at a nearby mural of a banquet. Look, melting down the head, pooling into the wig. What kind of metaphor drips? Another chimes in, half-eaten fig in hand. Art is full of idealizations. No one really had feet that long. Either you sip your beer quietly and resist the urge to remind everyone that no one's hair was actually painted bright cobalt blue, but they're not here for nuance. They're here for the cone wars. There are even fringe theorists. One claims cones were wigs themselves solid, scented hair pieces worn like hats. Another insists they were placed on tables during feasts, and the art simply misinterpreted the spatial positioning. A third proposes, with zero evidence and maximum confidence, that they were edible, lotus-flavored wax, dessert, and deodorant. No one takes him seriously, but you do see someone quietly write that down on a shard of ostrakhan. You glance around the room. Everyone here smells faintly of oil and scholarship. One of the priests has a cone perched proudly on his head, defiant in the face of doubt. Another scholar, coneless, sniffs the air and mutters, I miss the days when people debated metaphysics. The argument continues, and you realize this debate is as much about identity as it is about wax. The realists see cones as material proof of ancient refinement evidence that people care deeply about scent, presentation, and presence. The metaphorists see the cones as aspirational, idealized symbols of harmony, of fragrance's power to transcend daily grime. You lean back and smile, because either way, the point stands, scent mattered. Whether dripping from your crown or drawn above your head like an aura, perfume was how the Egyptians expressed life, status, faith, and clearly debate club membership. The gathering winds down. People stretch, yawn, and begin gathering their things. A few cones are gently plucked from wigs and tucked into waxed cloths. One scribe, whose cone has visibly run into his eyebrow, pats it off with a napkin and mutters, symbol or not, this one's going in my laundry. You walk out into the cool air of twilight, your own cone nearly gone. Just a faint glisten left behind. The sky above is deepening to indigo, and somewhere far off, you hear the soft beat of a drum. Maybe a feast, maybe a funeral, maybe both. You glance up and catch your reflection in a bronze water vessel. For a moment, You imagine a little cone drawn above your head, not real, maybe, but definitely meaningful, a symbol of effort, of elegance, of scent worn with pride, even in a world too hot for logic. So were they real? You decide it doesn't matter, because even if the cone never touched every head, the idea did. The debate still lingering in your mind. You stroll back through the city, your path now lit by flickering oil lamps and the warm orange glow from hearths tucked inside modest homes. The air is cooler now, no longer aggressively hot, just gently toasty, like someone turned the sun to simmer. And in that forgiving light, you pass something that stops you. A jewelry stall, small, wooden, unassuming. But on the top shelf, rows of delicate gold and copper headpieces, each with something oddly familiar perched in the center. Cone shapes, lots of them. It seems the perfumed cone had a fashion legacy beyond melting on wigs. Tonight, you're stepping into the unexpected world of cone-inspired jewelry, where fragrance met flair, and history got a little bit sparkly. The vendor is a middle-aged artisan with a sleepy dog at his feet and a magnifying lens strapped to his forehead. He sees you eyeing the display and nods. Hair cones, he says, tapping one of the golden pieces. Stylized, non-drip. You admire the craftsmanship. Tiny filigree domes made of beaten metal, some with dangling beads, others with etched lotus petals curling around the base. The design is unmistakable. Miniature versions of the wax cones you've seen all day, rendered in bronze and gold, made to look like scent without the mess. Popular at weddings, the artisan continues, lifting one shaped like a blooming lily. We make these for brides who don't want resin in their eyebrows by sunset. Fair, you pick one up and feel its weight light, but substantial. It clips into a wig or braided hair easily, holding the symbolic shape of the cone, but offering permanence. There's no melting, no scent, just form, suggestion, iconography. And here's the fascinating thing. These decorative cones didn't replace the scented ones, they lived alongside them. You learn from the vendor that some wealthy patrons commissioned both kinds. The real cone would melt during the event, while a metal one underneath remained, like a signature or a crown that outlasted the scent. Two layers of identity, ephemeral perfume above, eternal elegance beneath. That duality feels so very Egyptian. Because while the ancients had an obsession with the fleeting dripping wax, melting oils, the soft pluck of a harp echoing into the night, they also longed for permanence. And so, fashion filled the gap. One display features cone-shaped pendants, tiny amphorae, filled with perfume, worn on strings of lapis or glass. The cap unscrews, the scent inside, still faintly floral. You imagine someone reaching up mid-banquet to dab a little on their wrist while their actual cone did its slow, melty work. Another piece, a headband with an inlaid cone shape at the center. This one flanked by two lotus motifs. This one's old. The artisan says, pattern copied from a tomb painting. We don't know whose tomb, just someone fabulous. You laugh softly and run a finger along the edge. The cone isn't just a tool, it's a symbol of luxury, yes, but also beauty, poise, maybe even memory. Jewelry like this wasn't purely ornamental, it told stories, much like the perfume cones they honored. These pieces whispered things. I belong to a world of elegance. I know how to move through heat with dignity. I once reclined at a feast, and my wig smelled amazing. You ask if anyone still wears these. Oh sure, the artisan says, waving a hand. Festival days. Priestesses sometimes. One noblewoman had me make 12 of them in rose gold. She said she wanted to smell rich even when she couldn't afford the oils. Symbolism wins again. Even as the actual use of wax cones declined in later periods, gradually phased out in favor of liquid perfumes, scented pastes, and incense, this cone shape endured. in murals, in motifs, in accessories passed down from mother to daughter, wig stand to wig stand. Fashion has a long memory, and scent even longer. You purchase a small copper pendant shaped like a cone, light and simple. The artisan wraps it in linen and tucks in a few dried petals for authenticity. You thank him, and as you walk away, the piece presses coolly against your collarbone, a tiny reminder of everything that once melted so delicately across someone's forehead. The night deepens, stars blink overhead, quiet and precise. You walk through the hushed streets, like someone carrying secrets in the folds of your tunic. Because now, the cone wasn't just something worn, it was something carried into fashion, into memory, into metal and myth. And though the wax may be long gone, its shape lingers. Balanced, ornate, unbothered by time. You wake early the next day, earlier than usual, with that quiet feeling of something ending soon. The cone you wore yesterday is gone. Of course, just a trace of fragrance in your wig, a soft memory in your clothes. And today, you feel the tug of curiosity again. One final question, calling you deeper into the story. What happened to the cones you set out before the streets fill? When the sky is still the color of old linen, and even the donkeys are yawning, you pass shuttered stalls, temple gates creaking open, fishermen setting out in silence. And you wonder, when did the cones vanish? Not all at once. Surely, like most customs, they probably faded quietly, changed shape, became something else. You find yourself in the courtyard of a quiet temple school, where a scribe named Nanifer is sorting through scrolls in the shade. You've met him before, sharp-witted, mostly tolerant of questions. You sit beside him and ask, "Do you remember when people stopped wearing cones?" He doesn't answer right away, just waves a hand toward a wall painting above you. It's a banquet scene, as always, but this one's different. The women wear headbands, the men wear wreaths. There are still Perfume's jars of oil, bowls of incense, but no cones, no little wax peaks, no elegant drips. By this dynasty, he finally says, they'd gone out of fashion, maybe too messy, or maybe people just wanted something new. You nod. Historians believe the cone's disappearance happened gradually, around the later New Kingdom, or early Third Intermediate period. Depictions of actual cones began to vanish. Liquid perfumes took over. The scents didn't disappear. They just changed vessels. Instead of cones melting over wigs, oils were dabbed behind ears, rubbed on wrists, blended into body pastes. One theory is practical. Melting wax is hard to manage in a changing climate or during times of scarcity. Another is social new ruling groups, like the Libyans and Nubians, brought new customs, new aesthetics. The cone may have started to feel old-fashioned. A third theory, simpler still, hair changed. As wigs got lighter and styles more natural, the wax cones may have seemed too fussy, too retro. The aesthetic shifted from elegant glisten to casual polish. People didn't stop loving scent. They just no longer needed it to drip down their scalp in visible devotion. Nanifer opens a scroll and shows you something peculiar, a list of temple inventory from centuries after the classic cone era. It includes oils, incense, pressed flower paste, but nothing cone-shaped. They didn't forget the scent, he says. Just the method. You stay a little longer, letting the scroll's ink dry in the breeze. Then thank him and return to the city, your sandals padding over sun-warmed stones. As you pass through the streets, you see the echoes of cones everywhere, in garlands tied to doorways, in scent jars beside beds, in the headscarves of dancers twisted to hold flowers. The idea of the cone survived. In a private garden, a young girl is helping her mother with morning routines. She dips a finger into a small jar, and gently dots oil behind her mother's ear. The scent like jasmine catches the breeze. No cone in sight, but the ritual is the same. Scent still marks intention, still says, I prepared for this moment. I care how I move through the world. Further down, you pause by a perfume shop, modern for the time. Sleek shelves of paste and oil, but no wax. A customer is testing a new blend with a reed applicator, smiling as the scent unfolds on her skin. The shopkeeper, seeing your curious look, leans in and says, Conies. Oh, you still hear of them. My grandmother swore she saw one once at a wedding, but no one uses them now. Too much mess, not enough breeze, and just like that, gone. A fashion, a habit, a whole wax-based lifestyle, but not entirely forgotten. You keep walking. The air is warming up again, the day beginning its slow climb into brightness. You feel the need to mark the moment, so you reach into your bag and take out one of the cone-shaped pendants you bought earlier. It doesn't melt. It doesn't smell, but it remembers, because cones didn't disappear. They transformed into jewelry, into memory, into whispering metaphors about beauty that drips and passes, but leaves something behind. Even now, people still speak of them with curiosity. Students sketch them. Artists include them in scenes of how it used to be. Priests invoke their symbolism when preparing oils. No one wears them anymore, but everyone knows the image. Wax on a head, melting into grace. That's how you know something never really dies. So you tuck the pendant back into your robe, step into the soft shade of an archway, and look out at the city that once wore scent like a crown. It smells different now, but it still remembers. By now, you've wandered through temples and kitchens, marketplaces and tombs, boats and banquets. You've seen cones perched proudly on perfumed wigs, melted into laundry, argued over by scholars, and turned into gold jewelry that outlives its wearer by centuries. But before your journey ends, there's one more place to visit. Not a palace, not a shrine, just a quiet rooftop where someone has laid out a woven mat, a clay jug of cool water, and a few faded scrolls that smell faintly of cedar and skin oil. You climb the steps slowly, feeling the sun low on your back, the light thinner, now gentler, as if even Ra himself has kicked off his sandals for the evening. You settle down, back against the rooftop wall, and breathe in lotus dust, a hint of river wind, a cone's memory clinging to your hairline. The sky above turns lavender. The city below hums softly. Chickens settling, doors closing, soft laughter drifting across courtyards. You imagine you're not alone up here. Maybe someone else is on their roof across the alley, brushing out their wig, lighting a little incense cone, swatting the occasional mosquito with a perfumed cloth. You pour yourself a cup of water and drink slowly. It's not cold. Exactly. But it tastes clean, earthy, like it remembers the jar it came from. All around you is the ordinary beauty of an ancient city winding down, sandalwood smoke curling from a chimney, the rustle of palm fronds, a boy humming tunelessly as he balances a basket on his head, the perfume of living, moving, sweating, sleeping people, the real scent of Egypt. And in this quiet moment, you think of all the tiny details that cones touched. They weren't just accessories. They were rituals, signals, stories whispered in wax and oil. They told guests they were welcome. They told dancers they were admired. They told the gods, I have prepared myself. Even the act of applying one had its own rhythm. The wig adjusted. The cone pressed gently into place, maybe with a little hurry up from a friend already halfway out the door. The first scent, released sweet or sharp or soothing, was the unspoken promise. I came here on purpose. Historians might still debate the logistics, wax types, scent recipes, symbolism, But you've worn one now. You've felt it soften in the heat, caught your own scent on the breeze, noticed how people turn just slightly toward you when the wind shifts. You get it. It's not about proving the cone existed. It's about remembering how it made people feel. Present, proud, polished, a little ridiculous sometimes, sure, but also fragrant in a world where the sun worked very hard to make everyone smell the opposite. You lie back on the mat and look up. Stars blink into place, faint and steady, somewhere in the distance. A musician plucks a harp. The song is slow, dreamy. You think you've heard it before. Maybe at that garden party, or maybe in a dream. The cone is gone from your wig, nothing left but a faint sheen and a few trap petals you'll probably find tomorrow. But the story, still here, still soft, still scented, because in a world where life could be harsh and short and full of sand in every crevice, the Egyptians chose to melt perfume onto their heads. And that, honestly, is beautiful. Now close your eyes. The rooftops cool beneath you. The sky is a dome of velvet. Your pulse slows. You've wandered far, but you've arrived exactly where you need to be. A little scented, a little sleepy, and somehow exactly the right amount of ridiculous